Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Microsoft Office Add-ins community call. My name is David Chesnut, and I'll be your host for this call. Let's take a look at the agenda for today. We've got a lot to get through. Joining us today are Yoon Wang is joining to share some updates around the Word APIs, and Juan Balmari and Victoria Iannotti are joining, and they'll be talking about some Outlook add-ins updates around REST API decommission, shared folder support, and item multi-select. And finally, I'll be sharing some updates that we're doing to the SSO samples. So as we go along, if you have any questions, just type them into the chat and we'll answer those as we go along. If there's any questions we're unable to get to today, we post a blog summary of the call about a week out from today, and we post all the questions and answers in that blog. Also, this call is being recorded. It will be available on the YouTube Microsoft 365 community channel about 24 hours after the time of this recording. And just a reminder to folks, please keep your microphones muted as we go along so that we don't have any distractions to our presenters. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Yoon, do you want to share anything on the Word updates?
Okay, all right. So I'll start with the Word update. As you may already noticed, we had released the online-only requirement set about a month ago, back to May for Word JS APIs. This set is special because the APIs in it are available only for web version of Word. You may argue that JS APIs should support multiple platforms instead of just the web, but the reason we are doing so is to provide an opportunity for the add-ins, which are built primarily for web users, to get things quicker. Because web APIs can have more frequent deliveries compared to the desktop version in our internal process. The APIs in this set are production APIs, so that your released add-in can directly take advantage of them, even though your add-ins users may be mostly desktop users. You still can take this chance to release a version or take advantage of some of the web capabilities for your released add-ins. This is not saying that all the future features or functions will go into this set first. We just selectively choose which APIs will go into this set. And finally, in the end, sometimes in the future, all the APIs will go to the multi-platform support. For our policy here is that we will make sure in most of the cases, all the platform will have the same set of the APIs. Although we have exceptions, but we'll keep that exceptions as small as possible. And now we have 3 major feature areas supported for this online-only requirement set. We have footnote, endnote support, we have comments, we have track changes. Back to February, we had a introduction for the comments and track changes as preview version. But in the GA version in this online-only set, we added more capabilities for comments, and also we added support for footnote and endnotes for support. So here is a demo for you that to show how do we support footnotes and endnotes APIs. You can actually insert the footnotes and notes through the range object. And also you can select the endnote footnotes from different object, and you can also navigate to a specific node in your add-in. And also, we have some asks about the fields APIs, and we listened and we we implemented this field API in our preview set as well. But the interesting part here is that we have this field support in the web-only preview right now, so that you can directly try them. Right now, we support the collections of the fields so that you can navigate all the fields you have through different types of the Word object. And coming next, we will, so here are the candidates for next GA release. By saying GA release, I mean that it is a release that supports all the platforms. I can tell you that we will have more frequent cadence of delivery Word APIs in the coming months or years. And the most recent one or the next one will probably come in 6 months by the end of this year or earlier next year. So in that set, we will have like track changes, comments, etc. Those features to be included. But these are just the candidates, right? So we always can, have some chance to do some changes here. And please tell us what do you expect for the future GA releases, and if you want to take advantage of a more frequent deliveries for Word APIs. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Yoon. Very cool to see all this coming out for Word APIs. Looks like there might have been 1 or 2 questions in the chat. If you have a chance to answer those in the chat, and we can go on to the next presentation, which should be Juan and Victoria.
Yeah, I am sharing my screen now. So hello, everyone. This is Juan Balmori here. I am with Victoria Gianotti, and we are actually going to talk about 3 topics today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the REST decommission update. I also want to talk about support for shared folders in Exchange On Prem. And then finally, we're going to share some new feature that we are about to ship to beta, item multi-select. So let's get started. So I want to talk first about the REST decommission, where we are. As you know, just to set up some context, hopefully, if you're an Outlook add-in developer, back in February and even earlier, we've been sharing that the Outlook REST v2 endpoint is going to get decommissioned in November 30th this year. This is a big impact for Exchange Online and Exchange On Prem and hybrid. And if your add-in is using the REST APIs and the delegate scenario is using the REST APIs, it might get impacted, meaning it might not work. Well, it might impact it in the long term, I would say. Just for reference, I'm including here some sample code that you can see on how how you can. So if you have a code that is calling the get callback token with the is REST true, that means that you are getting a REST compatible token that you can actually use then to execute a few allowed REST operations. Basically, this is the inventory of APIs impacted and the potential, what's going to happen at some point when this goes down, right? What I shared basically, these are basically all the APIs that are related to REST operations. What I shared last time is that that we were able to grant exceptions. So the idea here is that we don't have a good replacement story for REST using that. The idea, of course, in the first place is that folks instead use the Graph API instead of the REST services. However, it was not until we shipped our single sign-on capability that this is kind of a suitable replacement in terms of the experience that you can have, because you don't have to pop any dialogues to the user and so on and so forth. So basically, the idea here is that all add-ins that are using REST APIs before the decommission date are going to be granted an exception, to keep using the REST API until 2019 goes out of mainline support of extended support, which is October 14, 2025. So that's the deal that we are working on and that we are executing on. That's a plan of record right now. So the second idea is that add-ins that were created after that decommission date will not be able to use the REST service after November 2022. And I'm here adding a star, and asterisk that is saying that this might change. So we are having a few discussions with some of you actually about some challenges that you guys are facing around moving to Graph. So I don't want to overpromise here, but there are a few discussions that maybe we will allow all add-ins even after the decommission date. But what's still going to be true is that after 2019, it's going to go out. Evidently, what I want to do is to buy some more time for you guys so that you can actually have, move your add-in to use the Graph API, but you do it in a way that you don't lose, that you don't pay in the experience, Basically, what we are doing right now is that we are collecting. The way that we are going to do this or we're planning to identify those add-ins, is by getting the IDs. So we basically are working on trying to get the traffic and try to identify, that, a REST call is coming from an add-in, to enforce this potential policy, And that's why a few months ago, I actually shared a link here, nkms.restcheck, that you can actually submit your add-in IDs. The ID that I'm talking about here is the add-in ID that is in the manifest. And I have seen a few of you sending it. To be honest, I was expecting more volume here, but I haven't received that much requests. I have approached some of you regarding this. Evidently, I'm planning to send an email to everybody, just to make sure that you are aware that we received your ID. But if you have an add-in that is using the REST API, an Outlook add-in that is using the REST API, please go here and set it up so that we are aware of it. So that's where we are right now. I also want to share a few issues that I have seen from some of you have been reporting, a few situations that are not ideal. Like, for example, in some cases, the REST API is faster than the Graph API. Specifically on loading attachments, I think some of you found that, the Graph API is very, very slow compared to the REST API. The Graph API is aware of all these potential issues, and they are working to make it better. They are solving these problems as a P1. My goal about sharing these issues with you is that if you're experiencing similar conditions, or if you're seeing that the performance is not the same, anything that it's kind of, impacting the experience of your add-in, please make sure to approach me. My email is here. Send me an email. I want to hear about it, and I want to work with the Graph team in order to solve those issues, right? So if you have any issues with the Graph, please let me know. The other thing here is that in terms of capabilities, or in terms of the API, I haven't heard so far any REST API that doesn't have an equivalent in the Graph. So functional wise, I think we are actually, so far, I haven't heard anything against that. So I think that functionality wise, I think we should be okay, but we could have performance issues, and obviously that's also an issue because that impacts the experience of the add-in. So the next one is authentication. So, authentication, and David's going to talk a little bit about this more later. But we have found that the pattern that we are, suggesting you guys to be following for authentication is to have like a middle tier to be routing the Graph calls, and this evidently is also doing some performance issues. This you need to do if you're authenticating with SSO, as you will see later. That the performance is not great. The team is also working in improving this significantly, but we're expecting this to be available later in the year. So that is another factor that is causing us to think about expanding a little bit the exceptions that we are going to grant. I think we need a bit more time. I haven't had the last word again here, but this is, we have problems like, for example, mobile. If you have an add-in in mobile that is not supporting mobile today doesn't support single sign-on, so you will require to do a MSAL or an auth redirect flow to support Graph calls, which is not an ideal experience, right, compared to what you can do with REST. So bottom line, so this is in track. We are getting requests. We're getting issues from some of you. The call to action here is, if you are experiencing anything that is preventing your add-in to have a great experience, please contact us. We're here to help. I will pause a little bit because I see a few interesting questions, well, at least one interesting question about the JavaScript API method of generating a Graph API token by Ryan. Ryan, yes, I have been, this is not that simple to do. It was our original goal to have an API like this. I think the auth team, our authentication PM, is working very closely with the identity team, and we are working on a new way of authenticating and doing the authentication on the single sign-on in a way that it's more similar to what we have today, but you will still require to do that. You will still require to use that API to do this. So we're not planning right now to release something that can get you a Graph compatible token, although it's on discussions. I cannot guarantee that's going to happen at this point. All right. So moving on. That was my first topic. Second topic is shared folders. So many of you have been asking me about, shared folder support. Shared folders, by the way, shared folder support is something that we shipped a couple of years ago, actually, or 3 years ago. But the problem is that it was only working in Exchange Online. It was not working in Exchange On Prem. So just for context, shared folders is this ability that you can actually, in the manifest, as you can see in this picture, you can add support shared folder flag to your add-ins. And basically what this means is that anyone who has an add-in installed and has access to either a shared folder, meaning that it's a delegate, or someone delegated access to my calendar or to my inbox, the add-in is going to be available. It's going to be kind of visible for that user. This is also true in preview right now for shared mailbox scenario. So this flag only enables the add-ins again in Exchange Online. But we have received a lot of feedback from you that it will be very good to have it also in on-prem. So basically, that's what we're doing. So this is in beta right now. If you install the latest beta and that is available, which is the build that you see in the screen right there, you will be able to enable shared folders in Exchange On-prem, right? So the call to action here is, please go ahead, install it, try it in Exchange 2016, 2019 should work. And if you have any issue, if you see that this is not working as you expect, please go and open an issue here in our issues here. Now, obviously, in 100% on-prem environments, we don't have the REST APIs available. So shared folders the shared folders feature has some REST API support for getting, the information about the owner of that folder and making calls on behalf of that user. So evidently, that's not going to work because 100% on-prem doesn't have REST APIs. But if you're in a hybrid environment, meaning you have kind of a mixture of on-prem and cloud, that should work. So please check it out. And this is your feedback. Help us ship something that is going to be useful for you, right? Okay. Graph compatible Tom. There are a bunch of questions here for events and stuff. Graph compatible tokens. I'm passing a little bit to see if there are any relevant questions here. Public folders are basically shared mailboxes folders. Gary's asking about shared mailboxes. Shared mailboxes is supported right now in beta as well in Win32. We are working also to support it in OWA, in Outlook Web Access, and in Outlook for the Mac. Right now it's in preview. So this beta program should also have support for shared mailboxes, right? Okay, moving on. My last update here is around item multi-select. So basically today, if you're adding Outlook add-ins have, affinity with just one item. They're providing, they can activate and have associated with a single item. If you are selecting multiple items in the Explorer view, add-ins are suddenly disabled, right? So basically what's going to happen and this is not yet available, not even in beta, but I just want to give you some kind of good news that this is coming, right? And what I mean by this is that, in the manifest, at some point in the future, you're going to be able to add a supports multi-select element as part of your action. So every adding command that shows up in the ribbon, for instance, you're going to be able to say, hey, this command supports item multi-select. And in order to explain you more detail how this is going to work, I invited Victoria Yanori, who is actually the developer of this feature, and she's doing her internship here at Microsoft with us, and she's working on this. So Victoria, if you want, you can actually share your screen and show us how this will work.
Thank you, Juan. I'll just share my screen now.
Yes, this will work. Thank you.
I think you should be able to see. So I just want to start off by demonstrating the current behavior that we have. This is just a dummy mailbox that I have open up and just populated with some emails. So currently, if I select one email, we can see on my upper ribbon, everything is enabled and I can perform all actions. if I go ahead and select 2 emails, the current behavior is what you just saw here with Viva Insights. So 1 email, it's enabled, 2 or more, it's disabled. However, this test add-in that I've implemented here has this multi-select feature enabled. So in the manifest, like Juan just showed, at the action level, there is the element for multi-select. And what we can do with this, I'm just going to show there's 2 main parts. One is the API and the second is the event. So right now I have this add-in opened and I'm going to go ahead and select multiple emails. So I'll select 3 and I can actually retrieve their information. So what's coming back here is a collection of item ID, the subject, the item type. So item type is here is a message, and there's also item mode because we are in read mode. So these are the 4 pieces of information that are being returned now, and later on this will be extended to offer even more functionality. And what we can also do is register for an event. There's a new event that's created, selection changed, and what this does, let me just clear the screen. I'll register for this event. Whenever my multi-selection changes, I get a selection changed event. So now we can keep track of when this happens. And there will also be a upper limit on multi-selection. So if you select too many emails, the add-in will be disabled. And there's some exploration that will be done to see what is the best number and which will lead to a better performance. Juan, is there anything else you'd like me to show?
Oh, I think, thank you very much, Victoria. I think it's very straightforward. I think in general, it's a very simple concept, you know, I to some degree, I'm sad that we weren't able to do it before for you guys, but now it's on the works, it's coming. And, you know, one of the things that we're going to be doing in the future around ultimately select is that we are, so right now what we did, the API that Victoria showed you, it's only giving you the ID of the items that are selected. So basically the idea is that once you have access to the IDs, then you can call services, a graph, for instance, and actually do additional operations on those items, like, for example, getting the attachments and, you know, whatever operations you need to do. What we're planning to do in subsequent releases, so I think right now we're doing that kind of the bare minimum that you guys need to enable multi-select. But in the future, we're going to provide richer API so that, for example, at the Office.js layer level, you can actually use all the APIs that we have today for items, and you don't have to call services in order to, you know, to interact with the items that are currently selected. So this is also coming soon for Outlook on the web as well. So thank you very much, Victoria, for sharing that demo. And hopefully people like it here. And again, eventually in one of these calls, I will let you know that this is in beta. We're shooting for end of summer, around September this year, later, you know, to have a beta program for this, and then you can actually play with it and give us your feedback as always. All right. And with that, I think that's what I wanted to cover for Outlook today, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Victoria. It was great to see all the new functionality and development and stuff coming out for folks. It's very cool to see. All right, so moving along to the next demo, which is me. So I'm going to talk about some SSO sample updates that are in progress. There's been some information that's come to our attention recently. We discovered that the Node.js sample in particular, which I'll be talking about here, was returning a middle tier token, and I'll have some graphics to kind of explain this a bit more, but it was returning a middle tier token back to the client, which is not something you should do. It's risky, and I'll show some more information about that as we go along to kind of explain more about this. So we have on the Office add-ins repo, there's a few SSO samples. There's one for Outlook, there's one for Office with ASP.NET, there's one for Node.js. And it was the one for Node.js in particular that was doing this. The other two weren't returning the token in that way, although they do treat, if they go to their fallback auth, they do treat the fallback auth that same way. So they are being updated in the process of that. So let me walk through how things should work and how it does work now with Node.js. So when you're doing SSO with the on behalf of flow, because your goal is to call Microsoft Graph Services, there's several different players in this flow. The black boxes on this slide are showing the parts that you would code. So the task pane add-in is your JavaScript and the task pane that gets displayed. Then you have a middle tier server, which has REST APIs that your add-in is going to call. And then the middle tier server will, through delegated access from the user that signs in, is going to call Microsoft Graph. And to make this work, the Office host that you're in, be that Excel, Word, PowerPoint, or Outlook, is involved as well. And the Microsoft Identity Platform is there because that's the platform that's going to create the tokens and also handle authorization requests. So the way it works is your add-in is going to call getAccessToken. That's an Office.js API that the Office host exposes. And then the Office host will return to you, for the currently signed in user, an access token. And anytime you get an access token, I think a good question is access to what? And in this case, it's an access token to your own middle tier server. So the add-in is going to use that to call the middle tier server, a REST API. And then the middle tier server is going to call Microsoft Graph. So now it has to do this on behalf of Flow because that access token only has like user identity and an access as user scope. It has no scopes to Microsoft Graph in it. So it can't be used to call Microsoft Graph. So it'll call out to Microsoft Identity Platform, your middle tier server does this, and say, hey, I want to exchange this for a graph token. Can you give me the scopes for that? And you'd pass along whatever it is you need, like files.read, for example. So Microsoft Identity Platform will do all the proper checks, make sure the user's consented, and it creates a new graph token that it returns to your middle tier server. So that's this token that's sort of a greenish color. It's a new one. And now the middle tier server can call graph, for example, getting a list of file names. Microsoft Graph will check that token and then return the data. I should also point out, like every step along the way when these tokens are passed, they're being validated. So your middle tier server is always validating. Microsoft Graph would also validate any token passed to it. So it returns the data, and your middle tier server may do some additional processing on that, and then it also returns data back to the add-in. So this is the successful flow. There's also another flow the sample needs to handle, which is the fallback. This could happen, say, if the Office host you're on doesn't support the API, or maybe an error occurs. So you call getAccessToken to your Office host, and you get an error back. So in this case, the add-in's going to say, okay, we're going to have to do fallback authentication because SSO isn't working. So we'll open up a dialog box. We'll use MSAL, Microsoft Authentication Library, to sign in using the OAuth 2 flow. So we're going to use Microsoft Identity Platform, pop up a dialog box, get them to sign in and consent. So we're going to get back an access token. And this is just like before. This is an access token that, again, is for your middle tier server. It doesn't have any graph access in it. So you're going to call your REST API. And at this point, it's the same flow as before. So middle tier server is going to do OBO flow, get the graph token, call graph, data comes back. Maybe you do some additional processing on that data before you return whatever the add-in needs. And then one more scenario that needs to be handled by this, or it is handled in the sample, is if your token expired. Now this could happen like you get your access token from the Office host and it returns the token, and say the token was really close to expiring. So this doesn't happen very often, but it can. So you call the REST API, you pass that token in the middle tier server, it goes to do the OBO flow, and at this point the token has expired, and so Identity Platform is not going to allow that, so you get an error back. And the way we handle this flow is we have the middle tier server return that error back to the client so that the client can say, oh, I need a new token. So you call getAccessToken again. At this point, Office will see that it's expired. It's not going to return an expired token, so it'll refresh it. Behind the scenes, it'll actually request this from the Identity Platform. It gets the updated token, which is sort of this bluish color, and then it returns that token. And again, it's just an access token to your middle tier server. And you call the REST API, and the whole OBO flow continues again. So that's what the sample needs to handle. And the thing that we changed is in this OBO flow, the sample was returning that token to the client, at least on Node.js, and which is not something you want to do. So let me share my desktop and just kind of walk through some of the code. Let's see, let's go to, so there's variety of links that I'll put these into the chat as we go, probably right after the presentation, so you have them. So I wanted to point out, The identity docs are your friend whenever you're working with this stuff. And so there is this link to the Microsoft Identity Platform on behalf of Flow, and it shows pretty much that same diagram I was showing. Office has an additional wrinkle, that you have a task pane in the middle tier, but it's pretty much the same flow. And down here, there's a warning that talks about, and I just want to point this out, like it says, don't send access tokens that you get in your middle tier anywhere else. And there's a list of things that can go wrong if you start doing that. And then in the sample itself, let me get the code. Here we go. All right, so this is the Office Node.js SSO sample. And in the folder structure, it's been reorganized a little bit. So you have your middle tier code down here in the routes. So there's a get files route and your server helpers, which are all to help call Microsoft Graph APIs. And then the client side is here under the JavaScripts. So everything that works with SSO is in these 3 files for the most part, especially SSO auth ES6. There's also a fallback MSAL folder that has, whenever you have to do fallback, this has all the code for doing MSAL, because it's sort of like you're implementing 2 auth systems. So there's a full MSAL implementation here, and then you also have your SSO implementation down here. And to see this in action, I've loaded this up here in Excel. And so this Office add-in Node.js SSO, you click Get OneDrive File Names. And what it does, it gets an access token, does the whole middle tier OBO flow, and then you get back your file names here, and they're printed into the document. One thing I think is interesting that I wanted to show is when you get that token, I want to show here, like here's where we're going to call get access token. And I'm going to step over that. And then this is the actual access token. It's all encoded. So I'm going to copy that. And there's this site you can go to called jwt.ms. And if you put tokens in here, you can decode them. It's just a handy way to kind of debug things and see what's going on. I find it very useful. So there's interesting things in here, like there's this audience value. This audience value is set to the ID of the app registration I created for my middle tier. So this is how I know this is going to access the middle tier. And so I go over, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, but this is my Azure app registration. If I go up to the overview, you'll see I have that same ID here. So you can look at any of the claims in here and you'll see like this is pretty much just a user identity token. So it's got my name for my test tenant that I have, preferred username. So this is kind of like OpenID values. It also has the scopes, which in this case is only accessed as user. So you won't see anything here having to do with Microsoft Graph, which is why the token on the middle tier is going to be the one that's going to have an audience set to a Microsoft Graph location. So anyway, if you ever need to debug, this is a very handy tool. I just want to make sure folks know about it. And now let's take a look at the code. One thing I wanted to point out, I don't think in the original sample it was very easy to extend. Like if you want to add more functions, it was a little tricky. So the way this works is in the onReady, we're going to wire up the click event. So if somebody says get a list of 10 files from my OneDrive, then it's going to call get file name list. And this is your basic pattern for calling any REST API in your middle tier server. You're going to have one function that makes the call, and then another function that handles the response. And the way this is working, this clear message is just clearing the task pane. So it's not an important part of this, but you want to create a request. So in the request, you're going to say, I need to call this particular API on my server. This one's called get user file names. I'm going to have the name of my response handler, which is this function down here. So you want to pass that for a callback function. And then another callback function so that when the request is created, it'll pass it back to you. You'll get this client request. Once you have it, you can go call the web server. This seems a little complicated. The main thing I just want to show here is like, say you wanted to get calendar items from Graph, right? You could create another function, get calendar items, and you just do the same pattern, create request, but just plug in the REST API in your middle tier server that does that particular function. And then you'll get back the response to your handler. And then you just do whatever it is you need to do with that response. Maybe just write them out to your document or show them in the task pane or whatever. So that's how you would extend this sample. Now to show how it works, let's take a look at the create request. And what create request is doing is basically creating this little structure. It's a client request. Because of all those flows, I was just showing there's various points at which we might need to pop up a dialog. If we're doing fallback, we might need to request a new token. So we end up looping around sometimes. And I found it was just easier just to create this request to kind of track what was the original thing we were trying to do, because there's like a lot of sequencing going on. So this will track our auth options for SSO, which we just default to true for all these. There's a global variable for auth SSO that's defaults to true, but it'll flip to false if we have to do a fallback, because we have to track whether or not, which type of authentication are we trying to do with this request. We track the access token that's in use, the URL that we're going to call on our middle tier, and then the two callback functions, one for when the REST API is completed, and then the other one, which we'll call right after we create this request. So to create the request, we check if we're using auth SSO. If we are, then we're going to go get our token, and then we're going to call our callback function, and we've completed. If not, we're going to go use dialog fallback, pass the client request along, and then the dialog fallback will handle fulfilling that request and then calling back to the original function. And then get access token from SSO. This is where it's going to do the actual get access token call to Office, and then it returns that access token. If there's any error, then we have a handler for that. This is actually was in the sample from the beginning to look at various SSO errors. And we'll throw an error back to the caller, which indicates that they're going to have to do fallback. And then what was the other piece of this? So there is a part in the flow later where we need to handle web server errors. So this is, we call the middle tier REST API, but it returned an error. And I mentioned there's a possibility, it's like there's several, we track this type, the sample just does this, like it creates a type and it says, okay, it could be Microsoft Graph failed. If that happened, we're just gonna show the error for Microsoft Graph. There's a possibility we didn't have access as user for some reason. There's also a possibility, this is the error we get from the identity platform if the token expired. And in this case, we're going to say, oh, I need to retry this call. So we're tracking this and we return that back to caller to go do a retry loop. Fallouts fails, there's this switch to fallback auth, which will set our global defaults and then create a new request that's using fallback instead of auth SSO. So it gets sort of, I wish it wasn't quite as complicated as this. I've been trying to simplify this and simplify it, but you know, and it's open source. If folks have ideas on how to simplify this further, please feel free to contribute. On the server side, I want to point out an important thing. I don't think this was here originally, but so when our middle tier server is called, you always want to validate that token. You don't want to just accept any token that gets passed to your server because it's a public API endpoint. So we have this auth helper validate JWT, and then over here it's going to set our validation options. So we're going to make sure like the audience is correct, like the audience should be for us. And there's some additional information here. If you want to know more about token validation, there is another topic in the identity docs, which I'll throw a link into, because this is really just standard Microsoft identity stuff. It's not really specific to Office. And we're also going to check, we're going to look through the scopes of that token that got passed to us and make sure it is an access as user scope. And then once we've confirmed all that, and every API needs to do this, that you're going to expose, then you would do the on behalf of flow. And we set up, you know, our graph URL that we're going to call, the parameters to, you know, select the name and just the top 10. And then we use our helper methods to go get that graph data. And then we check to see what happened. If graph returned an error, this is where we set our error type to Microsoft Graph, return that back to the client. If it worked, we'll return a success along with an array that's a list of the file names. And we also check for the expired token scenario. So this is where we would set that. If all else fails, we'll just say it was an unknown error. We just pass along the details and they get surfaced on the task pane. Let's see, just want to make sure I covered everything. Go back to the slides here for just a second. Okay, so a couple of important security notes I'll pass along. One is never cache tokens yourself. It can be risky to do that, especially if you have a bug. You can inadvertently end up exposing user data or leaking a token, and that could be bad. So what you do is you always call get access token. Office caches this for you. So anytime you need it, just call get access token. You don't need to try to go create your own caching mechanism. And if you're using like the on behalf of flow, MSAL does the same thing. Like when you call that on behalf of flow, if the token was already acquired, MSAL's cached it for you. So you don't have to think, oh, I got my OBO token back. I need to store that somewhere and save it. There's no need to do that. You don't need to, well, obviously, you never return tokens from the middle tier back to the client. So I think we covered that pretty well. There's that link to the docs that explains more about what the risk is for that. Make sure you always validate the access token that's passed your REST APIs. You might consider a well-known client list, like if you know there are specific tenants you work with, you can configure that in your Azure app registration. So that's something to think about. Also, the client secret. Oh, I didn't show the client secret. Your middle tier will use a client secret to call, and that should be stored securely, like maybe Azure Key Vault. If I switch back, yeah, let me switch back real quick. I just want to show where that secret is. There is this env file that's in the sample. Here it is, this one, and this tracks. This is for the middle tier, so it has this client secret. And for testing development purposes, this is fine. We're just saying, like, when you deploy, you don't want to just have it in a file or something. You'd want to actually go put this like in Azure Key Vault. So that was that last slide. Let's see if we have any questions. Okay, I'm going to kind of go backwards here. My SSO access token, the audience, is in Outlook includes the server name. Is that something that Outlook does differently from other Office products? As everyone had just the ID. Yeah, I think you might see differences depending on which Office host you're in. Behind the scenes, Office goes and requests the token from Microsoft Identity Platform. And I didn't show that flow because it's not something you have to worry about. So Office never creates these tokens. They always come from Microsoft Identity Platform. So there could be subtle differences. The validation should work. I'm just looking at, you have the audience API localhost 4200. I'm not sure what you're saying there because that looks like the reply, not the reply, there's a URI, resource URI that you have to use, which isn't the same as the audience. So the audience should always be set to the ID of your app registration. If it's not, the token validation will fail. I'm just looking through, is there other questions? I don't see any, so. Okay, so I'm going to move along to the community spotlight slide, and once again, say thank you to Maarten van Stam for presenting on the last call, showing Blazor with Excel, which is really cool. So that's a cool sample to have. And if you're interested in also contributing and helping, feel free to do so. There's a link to the Office add-in samples repo there, as well as there's a recognition program on PNP where you can get your own badge for helping contribute. So feel free to do that. We appreciate all the help we get. I want to mention also that we now have these community panels where you can join, and from time to time, we might reach out to folks who are interested to do various surveys or research into specific areas about the products and future development. So if that's something you're interested in any of these areas, please feel free to go click on a link and sign up. And speaking of community panels, there is a panel coming up. Now, this was a panel that it was supposed to happen in June, and I inadvertently sent out the wrong links, and so the links didn't work. And so I apologize if anyone tried to join that call and wasn't able to. That's my bad. So I've moved this out. It's now 2 weeks from today on July 27th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. What this panel is just a discussion about the samples that we have. Those are samples in the repo, samples in Script Lab, samples in Docs, and just doing some exploration into, what use do you get from them? Do you have any friction with trying to use them? Are there areas we should have samples for that we haven't considered? So it's kind of a discussion in that space to help us plan for what we want to do with samples over the next year. So please feel free to join and give us any feedback you have. And let's take a look at some Q&A. So these are questions that come in from the Q&A form that we have, which I'll provide a link to in just a few slides. So Q&A, what can you tell us about the approach and timing of the upcoming integration of Loop components with Excel? So I reached out to the team on this. There's nothing on the roadmap at this time, But if you have ideas or requests or things you're looking for, please create a feature request at the AKA link there. And is there a way we can create desktop shortcuts for MS Office add-ins, specifically for Word? So I wasn't sure if this meant keyboard shortcuts. If that's the case, then yes, but this is only available in Excel today. You can find more information at there's a link here to our keyboard shortcuts article. If you're looking for keyboard shortcut support in Word, then let us know more about that in a feature request at, again, same link, M365 dev-suggestions. And then this is a question that came in 1 or 2 calls ago. It somehow slipped through the cracks, so I wanted to make sure I addressed it. It was a question about get access token for SSO, and there's 2 parts to this. One is clarifying like which namespace that folks should be using when you call get access token. Is it office runtime.auth.get access token or office.auth.get access token? So the answer for part 1 is you can use either one. Behind the scenes, they end up calling the same code. There was just a refactoring that happened at some point in time. I guess you could say like the official one is office.auth.get access token. So like we're going through the docs and finding these and making sure they all say office.auth.get access token. But that doesn't mean you have to go change your code. It will work fine. There is a possibility maybe in the future if there's some change made, it'll probably only happen on the new namespace, the office.auth namespace, but nothing breaking is going to happen. And part 2 of that was why does the documentation refer to office.auth when the full namespace is office.context.auth? Can you confirm the full namespace? And yeah, it's office.auth.get access token. Don't use office.context.auth. I think that might have been an old preview namespace. It's definitely not in use anymore. So next question, is there a way for an admin to install Excel add-in for the user or group that will show only for some Excel files generated by your application and not when the user creates new Excel files or some other Excel files opened by the user? So there isn't any way to install an add-in based on conditions. I mean, it's either installed or it's not installed. There are some things you can do, though, and this might help as a workaround. Like you can enable functionality in your add-in based on various conditions. So for example, there's this article on how to run your code on document open. So when the document opens, you could check and basically enable or disable certain features in your add-in based on what it is you're trying to detect in the file. You can also show the task pane or hide the task pane based on conditions, and there's a link to the article on how to do that. You could also embed your add-in into the spreadsheet if you're opening the file from your service, the open in Excel pattern, and there's a link there for more information on that. So, but if you're looking for more than that, go create an idea request and let us know more about it. It sounds very interesting at the M365 dev-suggestions link. Oh, this is a question for Juan. Juan, if you're still on the call. There's a person that registered a request at RestCheck, but weren't sure what happened.
Yeah, you should get an answer for me, and I will send the acknowledgements again. But you should have get an email that says, "Hey, we got your entry here." So, yeah, thanks for showing this and for asking. Yeah.
Do you think they should just go like submit it again, or?
If I don't know if this person is in the call and they can, I mean, I don't sure. I mean, I should get it. I should have it, and he should get a reply for this if he submitted it.
Okay.
He or she or. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, Juan.
Yeah.
Just looking at the questions here in the chat. I see there's a question going on about something about types when using the JS API and getting TS ignores. I'm trying to figure out if that's a conversation that's in midstream or am I seeing the original question? But I want to say if you haven't used TS ignores, there should be there's a type library that you can use for Office.js. In general, like if you use Office to create a TypeScript project, it will actually install into your package JSON those type libraries, and then you shouldn't be having issues with the types. So hopefully that helps. Is there a way to catch add-in event timed out after 300 seconds in Excel? We currently see this warning only when we open a task pane. I would have to ask the team on that one. I'm not sure. And then Dane asked, did I read correctly on the previous chart that you can embed add-ins in Excel workbook. Trying to figure out which chart. I'm not sure which chart, Dave. If you could just let me know which chart you're referring to. Was that something in the slide deck? Anyway, I'm going to move along since we're reaching, the Q&A chart. Q&A chart. This is back here. That you can embed add-ins in an Excel workbook. Oh, maybe is that the open in Excel pattern? Yes, you can embed add-ins. There's an article here on the open Excel pattern. I'll throw that link in there that talks about how you can, through open XML, basically, there's a way you can actually embed your add-in. There's also an open in Teams example that shows a different way to do it. So you might be interested in that as well. Okay, so near the top of the hour. So I just want to get through the in matter slides here. So for folks, if you're new to Office add-ins, there's a lot of resources here you can go check out for documentation, quick starts. I definitely recommend the aka.ms/m365dev program, which gives you a free Office tenant that you can use for developing and testing. It's very useful. If you want to engage with the team, there's some links and resources here for if you have technical questions about Office add-ins, you can go to stackoverflow.com or this aka link to office-add-ins-dev-questions. For product bugs, let us know on our office-js repo. And future requests and ideas, go to aka.ms/m365dev-suggestions. There's also additional community calls besides this one. So there's links here for all of these calls. If you're interested in any of these areas, go check those out. You can get all the calls and assets at aka.ms/m365pnp. And finally, just a quick thanks to everybody. Thanks for attending the call. The recording will be available 24 hours from now on the Microsoft 365 Community YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter at Microsoft 365 Dev, at M365PNP. Next call will be August 10th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. There's, if you want to see the agenda, there's a link for the agenda at the bottom there. You can also submit questions in advance at aka.ms/office-add-ins form. So feel free to use that form if you have any questions that you'd like to see answered on the next call. And with that said, I'll check there's a few more of these on the chat after the call here. But thanks everyone for joining, and we will see you on the next call.